1990 was a transition from the most degenerate decade in NFL history to the perfect combination of aggression and rising sophistication. The improving athletes were colliding under looser rules that had not yet sterilized the game in the way we see today. Helmets looked clunky, pads were oversized, but the games had just the right amount of street brawl nature to them. The league had expanded the playoffs to 12 teams, adding 2 extra wildcards and opening the door for more possibilities. But the San Francisco 49ers were gunning for a historic three-peat behind the great Jerry Rice and the reigning MVP Joe Montana, who looked nearly untouchable during the regular season en route to a repeat MVP campaign. They finished 14-2 with elite units on both sides of the ball, but a new challenger had emerged. Bill Parcells' New York Giants didn't win pretty, but they won nonetheless. Quarterbacked by the backup Jeff Hostetler after Phil Simms went down, led by a defense headlined by Lawrence Taylor, they bullied through their schedule to the tune of a 13-3 record. In the AFC, the Buffalo Bills introduced the world to a futuristic, fast-paced, no-huddle offense known as the K-Gun. Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, and Andre Reed led the league's most high-powered unit, while their legendary sack artist Bruce Smith won Defensive Player of the Year. But the AFC was still wide open. The Raiders, led by Bo Jackson and a punishing defense, also had a say. That was until Bo tragically injured his hip during a 51-3 AFC Championship loss to Buffalo, spelling the end of his NFL career. But the NFC Championship game between the Niners and the Giants was one for the ages. It was a defensive showdown with just a single touchdown scored. Montana was knocked out of the game, and while essentially running out the clock, 49ers running back Roger Craig fumbled, setting up the Giants' game-winning field goal. And with that, the three-peat dream was dead. In Super Bowl 25, the Giants played the Bills in one of the tightest title games in NFL history. New York ran a masterclass in ball control, holding the ball for over 40 minutes. Even so, Buffalo had a shot to win as Scott Norwood stepped up for a 47-yard field goal, but missed wide right. The Bills would lose 20-19 in one of the most heartbreaking moments of the 90s. The 1990 season would prove to be a turning point. It was the last breath for the Parcells-era Giants and the Montana-led 49ers. Joe Montana would never start another full season in San Francisco, and Bo Jackson's mythos was frozen in time, while Scott Norwood became a symbol of agony in Buffalo. But out of that, a new era began. The Bills' loss was only the beginning of the most torturous saga in league history. The Cowboys were loading up, and the NFL would soon become faster, younger, and more nationally visible. But in 1991, teams were getting smarter. Offenses were more balanced, and thanks to Buffalo, the no-huddle was starting to spread. The NFC was still the center of power, but it wasn't the 49ers or Giants who ruled. The Washington Redskins were dominant. Head coach Joe Gibbs led what might have been the most underrated, forgotten juggernaut of the decade. They had no glaring weaknesses. Mark Rypien was an efficient and underrated quarterback, and he had weapons. Art Monk, Gary Clark, and Ricky Sanders comprised a legendary receiving trio known as the Posse. Meanwhile, the offensive line, nicknamed the Hogs, bulldozed opponents week after week. Washington ran roughshod through their schedule on their way to a league-best 14-2 record, but because the spotlight never seemed to shine on them the way it did for flashier franchises, they were oddly underhyped despite their dominance. Meanwhile, in Buffalo, the K-Gun was still alive and well. Thurman Thomas racked up over 2,000 total yards and even won the MVP award. The Bills were back for revenge. They tore through the AFC, and even with Bruce Smith missing most of the season, they were still a threat to win it all. But Detroit, of all teams, emerged as a surprise power in the NFC behind Barry Sanders and an emotionally charged run after offensive lineman Mike Utley was paralyzed in Week 12. While Atlanta, with flashy personalities like Deion Sanders, brought swagger to the playoffs. But none of them were stopping Washington. The Redskins obliterated the Falcons 24-7, then beat the Lions 41-10 in the NFC Championship. Super Bowl 26 was also no contest, with Washington winning 37-24 over Buffalo. And it wasn't even as close as it sounds. The Redskins led 24-0 at one point. The 1991 Redskins may be the greatest team nobody talks about. They finished with a 261-point differential, blew through the playoffs, and won a title with total control. But it was also the end of the line for them. In 1993, Gibbs would retire temporarily, and Washington, of course, has not won a Super Bowl since. And for Buffalo, it was heartbreak all over again. They had a loaded roster, the MVP, a revolutionary offense, and still couldn't seal the deal. And yet, they'd be back. But the 49ers, with Steve Young now running the show, missed the playoffs for the first time since 1982. The Cowboys were just starting to click. Brett Favre was a rookie in Atlanta, so the torch was about to be passed. But for one season, Washington stood over everyone, quietly building an argument as the most complete team of the decade. But 1992 was the year of the Cowboys' arrival, helping shift the league toward a more glamorous vibe. There was a new energy coming out of Dallas, with pretty uniforms, bright lights, and a trio of marketable young stars. But the drama started with the quarterback situation in San Francisco. Joe Montana missed the entire 91 season and practically the entire 92 season with an elbow injury. Steve Young made his case undeniable to become the new face of the franchise. He was electric all season, won the MVP, and led the Niners to a 14-2 record. But Dallas made the NFC more than a one-team race. The Cowboys, coached by Jimmy Johnson and led by the holy trinity of Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin, finished 13-3. Emmitt won the rushing title, the defense was ferocious, and Aikman had evolved from game manager to big moment passer. Beginning to reap the rewards of the 1989 Herschel Walker trade, they were stacked. But over in the AFC, the Bills were still good. Even after losing the AFC East to the Dolphins, they made the playoffs as a wild card. But the real story was the Houston Oilers, and the worst collapse in NFL history. In the AFC wildcard game, Houston built up a 35-3 lead over the Bills, who were starting backup quarterback Frank Reich. The Bills then roared back in front of a Buffalo crowd in disbelief, scoring 5 straight touchdowns and eventually winning in overtime 41-38. It's still the biggest playoff comeback in NFL history. And with Jim Kelly returning from injury a couple of weeks later, Buffalo carried that magic all the way to the Super Bowl, where they had the misfortune of meeting the loaded young Cowboys. In Super Bowl 27, Dallas humiliated Buffalo 52-17. They forced an unthinkable 9 turnovers and knocked Jim Kelly out of the game. Aikman threw 4 touchdowns and the dynasty had begun. This was the 3rd straight Super Bowl appearance for Buffalo and their 3rd straight loss. The emotional weight of wide right in 1990 had grown heavier each year, but for Dallas it was liftoff, and from here on, even to this day, the league would revolve around them. Meanwhile, Steve Young had proven he was the guy in San Francisco, but his season ended in disappointment. The NFC title game was a hard-hitting masterpiece, where Dallas proved to be the better team, but Young's moment would come in time. With this, the 80s were far in the rearview mirror. The Cowboys ran the show, and the NFL was about to enter its most star-driven, commercially explosive era yet. But in 1993, the NFL introduced unrestricted free agency and officially awarded expansion franchises to Carolina and Jacksonville, setting the stage for a 30-team league by 1995. And they experimented with 2 bye weeks for the first and only time, making for odd pacing throughout the season. But if there was one constant, it was the Dallas Cowboys on the hunt for back-to-back rings. But even for Dallas, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Before the season even kicked off, the Cowboys were thrown into turmoil. Emmitt Smith was holding out, and he missed the first 2 games, both of which Dallas lost. So Jerry Jones folded, made him the highest paid back in the league, and Emmitt came back to carry the team. Even with the late start, he rushed for 1,500 yards, won his 3rd straight rushing title, and in Week 18, with the NFC East on the line, suffering a separated shoulder during the game, Emmitt put on one of the grittiest performances in NFL history, totaling 229 yards against the Giants in a brutal overtime win. That game put an epic capstone on his season, clinched him the MVP, and made him a legend. Meanwhile, Joe Montana had resurfaced in Kansas City. After sitting out all of 91 and riding the bench in 92, Montana was traded to the Chiefs, and suddenly the AFC had a new narrative. The Bills and Oilers were probably the better actual teams, but all eyes were on Joe Montana. And in the playoffs, he delivered. Montana came through with 2 come-from-behind wins, beating the Steelers and then outdueling Warren Moon and the Oilers. But he suffered a concussion in the AFC title game, and the Chiefs were crushed by Buffalo. In the NFC, it came down to Dallas and San Francisco for the 2nd year in a row, and the NFC Championship rematch wasn't close, as Dallas easily won 38-21. And in Super Bowl 28, the Cowboys and Bills met again. For Buffalo, it was getting ridiculous. In their 4th straight Super Bowl appearance, they led 13-6 at halftime, then Dallas erupted and Emmitt Smith took over. The Cowboys scored 24 unanswered points and won 30-13. The Bills became a tragic legend, with 4 Super Bowl losses in 4 years, and this was their final shot. But for Emmitt Smith, 1993 was the year he proved what he meant to Dallas. The shoulder game, holdout, rushing title, MVP, and Super Bowl MVP all in one season. The heart of the Cowboys dynasty. A dynasty that would soon take a fascinating turn. And Joe Montana's Kansas City run was short but memorable. He proved he could still play with anyone, but holding up for an entire season just wasn't going to happen. And quietly, in Green Bay, a young Brett Favre was heating up and won his first playoff game. Eventually, he would wear the crown. But for now, the Cowboys were still the Kings. However, the NFL became more modern in 1994. Uniforms got a facelift with the league-wide throwbacks for the NFL's 75th anniversary. Fox took over NFC broadcast and changed the sound of Sundays forever. But right in the middle of it all were the two teams that owned the decade, the Cowboys and the 49ers, in a battle over who got to call themselves the team of the 90s. The Cowboys were gunning for the first three-peat in league history, but behind the scenes, things had fallen apart. Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson's relationship had turned south following Super Bowl 28, and now Barry Switzer was coaching the loaded team Johnson built. And 1994 became Steve Young's masterpiece. He had the best season of his career, winning his second MVP with 35 touchdowns, just 10 picks, and a league-best 112.8 passer rating. More importantly, he had the team to back him up, especially on defense, where San Francisco added Deion Sanders. But in the regular season, the Chargers shocked everyone by going 11-5 and earning the number 2 seed in the AFC. The Browns were actually good under Bill Belichick. The Patriots were rising with Drew Bledsoe. Dan Marino was back and gunning it. But in the end, the AFC could not match the high-end talent of the NFC. Dallas and San Francisco both coasted through the season. Their inevitable NFC Championship clash in Candlestick Park was the real Super Bowl. And San Francisco finally got revenge. They jumped out to a 21-0 lead in the first quarter, and although Dallas clawed back, it was not enough. Final score 38-28 49ers. And in Super Bowl 29, the 49ers annihilated the overmatched Chargers, 49-26. Steve Young threw a Super Bowl record 6 touchdowns, shaking off the ghost of Joe Montana. This was the peak of Steve Young's career. He got the ring, the MVP, and the monkey off his back. The 94 49ers became one of the greatest teams of all time, loaded on both sides of the ball, and they destroyed everyone in the playoffs. Dallas was still great, but the dynasty was wobbling. And despite their flash this year, the Chargers wouldn't be back to a championship level for a long time. Fox's broadcast takeover changed how football looked and sounded. Sideline reporters, fancy graphics, cleaner cameras. This was the year football truly stepped into the modern age. But in 1995, the league finally added those 2 new teams, the Carolina Panthers and Jacksonville Jaguars, and had 30 franchises in play once and for all. All that was new and exciting, but the main story was that Jerry Jones was dead set on proving the Cowboys could win without Jimmy Johnson, and he added Deion Sanders in hopes of achieving that goal. Outside of Dallas, Brett Favre took the league by storm, winning his first MVP and throwing a league-leading 38 touchdowns. He led the Packers to an 11-5 record while Reggie White anchored the defense. Green Bay was becoming must-watch, and Jerry Rice went crazy, totaling an NFL record 1,848 yards receiving. But in Dallas, Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin were in peak form, and the Cowboys ripped through the NFC to finish 12-4. In the AFC, the Steelers won their second straight division title. Head coach Bill Cowher had built a nasty, physical team that played with heart. They finished 11-5 and looked like the AFC's most complete team. But the Colts, led by a QB Jim Harbaugh, became the feel-good story of the season, winning 2 road playoff games and nearly shocking the Steelers in the AFC title game. Their final play, a last-second Hail Mary caught and dropped in the end zone, became instant playoff lore. But the Super Bowl stage belonged to Dallas. In the NFC title game, they eliminated the Packers behind Emmitt Smith's 150-yard, 3-touchdown performance. And in Super Bowl 30, against the Steelers, while the score stayed close, the result never really felt in doubt. An unheralded corner by the name of Larry Brown picked off Neil O'Donnell twice, setting up 2 touchdowns. Dallas won 27-17 and captured their 3rd title in 4 years. But this would prove to be the last peak of the Cowboys dynasty. Barry Switzer and, more importantly, Jerry Jones got the ring, but everyone knew who really built this team. And Brett Favre's rise was undeniable, and his Packers would be heard from again soon, while the Steelers would remain contenders but continue to fall short in the coming years. As for the expansion teams, Carolina and Jacksonville were expected to flounder, but both were already laying the foundation for success. However, in 1996 came the rebirth of a legacy franchise that had not touched a title in nearly 30 years, while the Cowboys went just 10-6, losing their mystique, and the 49ers were aging, so the NFC was there for the taking. Brett Favre was on another level. He won his second straight MVP, throwing 39 touchdowns, 13 picks, and leading the Packers to a 13-3 record. But it wasn't just Favre dominating. Green Bay had the number one offense and the number one defense, with Reggie White and Leroy Butler. And we can't forget Desmond Howard, who was a game-changing return man. This Packers team was built perfectly for cold weather January football. But the NFC ran deep. The Panthers, in just their second season as a franchise, finished 12-4. But by the playoffs, it was clear Green Bay was in a league of their own. Over in the AFC, the Browns had been moved to Baltimore, becoming the Ravens, and the Broncos looked like the favorite with John Elway and a revitalized offense led by Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharpe. But they were upset by Jacksonville, the other second-year expansion team, in one of the biggest playoff shockers ever. So the AFC Championship came down to New England and Jacksonville, and the Patriots, behind Drew Bledsoe and Curtis Martin, won that battle. But even in the celebration, it was obvious they were not ready for what was waiting. In Super Bowl 31, the Packers handled business. Favre hit Andre Rison deep on the opening drive, ran one in himself, Reggie White sacked Bledsoe 3 times, and Desmond Howard sealed it with a 99-yard kickoff return that won him the Super Bowl MVP. Final score 35-21 Packers. Green Bay was back on top of the football world after multiple decades, and Vince Lombardi could rest easy. Favre had solidified himself as the face of the league, and all roads ran through Lambeau. And Dallas? They were pretty much done. They wouldn't win another playoff game until 2009. Their dynasty had crumbled because of ego. But the Jaguars and Panthers, both making conference title games in just their second season, was unreal. And while the AFC was still trying to earn its respect, the NFC made it 13 straight Super Bowl wins. The balance of power was comically lopsided, but change was coming. Because 1997 was about redemption, about finally living up to expectations. After a decade of NFC dominance, the AFC had enough, and at the center of it all stood John Elway, the grizzled gunslinger who'd been embarrassed in 3 Super Bowls, each worse than the last. For years, his postseason failures had overshadowed his greatness. However, the Green Bay Packers were loaded once again. Brett Favre won his 3rd straight MVP, though this time it was a co-MVP shared with Barry Sanders, as he threw for 35 touchdowns and the defense remained elite. They went 13-3 and looked plenty capable of repeating, but challengers were everywhere. In the NFC, the 49ers returned to form with a 13-3 record of their own in head coach Steve Mariucci's debut season. The Vikings were good, the Buccaneers had started to build an identity with Tony Dungy and an elite defense, and the Giants somehow won the NFC East despite averaging 19 points a game. But the AFC had real contenders. The Steelers were always in the mix. The Chiefs, led by a devastating defense, went 13-3, but Denver had the secret weapon, which was balance. Elway no longer had to be Superman. The Broncos went 12-4, but slipped to a wild card due to a late-season rough patch. Though it wouldn't matter. Denver bulldozed through the playoffs, avenging their 1996 collapse by crushing the Jaguars, outlasting the Chiefs in a defensive slugfest, and beating Pittsburgh for the AFC title. In the NFC, Green Bay held off a surprisingly competitive Buccaneers team, then beat the 49ers in a foggy NFC title match, making for a captivating new school versus old school Favre-Elway matchup. But Super Bowl 32 was different. Elway would not let this one slip away. The Broncos went punch for punch with the Packers. Terrell Davis, suffering from a severe migraine, still ran for 157 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Elway famously scrambled and helicoptered through the air for a first down. That was the image that defined the game. Denver won 31-24, snapping the NFC's 13-year Super Bowl winning streak and delivering John Elway his long overdue ring. He finally got a storybook moment and a permanent rewrite of his legacy. But Terrell Davis became a legend in his own right, While for the Packers, it was a gut punch. They had the better record, the MVP, the momentum. It would be Favre's only Super Bowl loss, and he would never get back. But in 1998, a rookie took the league by storm, single-handedly creating the fastest, most explosive, highest-scoring offense the league had ever seen. This was Randy Moss's year, and for all the incredible players around the league, no one tilted the axis of the NFL like the skinny kid from Marshall, who seemingly turned every deep ball into a touchdown and made every other athlete on the field look like a complete joke. The Minnesota Vikings offense was unfair. Randall Cunningham, Chris Carter, Robert Smith, and Randy Moss combined to make up the most unstoppable unit in league history. Moss scored 17 touchdowns as a rookie. Minnesota broke the all-time points record, averaging 35 per game. They were blowing teams out by halftime, and they finished 15-1, looking unstoppable. But out west, the defending champion Broncos began the season 13-0. Terrell Davis rushed for over 2,000 yards, winning the MVP, and though they stumbled late in the season once again, finishing 14-2, they were still the most battle-tested team in football. Meanwhile, Peyton Manning made his debut in Indianapolis. He threw 28 picks, but showed promise. And the Jets, coached by Bill Parcells, put together a surprise 12-4 run behind Vinny Testaverde and a nasty defense. But the NFC playoffs felt like a formality. Everyone was bracing for Minnesota versus Denver. But in the NFC Championship game, the Vikings led 27-20 late, and Gary Anderson, who hadn't missed a kick all year, lined up for a 38-yard field goal to seal it, and he missed wide left, allowing Atlanta to drive down, tie the game, and eventually win in overtime. For a fan base that has seen its fair share of torture, it was the biggest gut punch in Vikings history, a 15-1 season and a record-breaking offense down the drain. But Denver took care of business in the AFC, beating Miami and the Jets, and in Super Bowl 33 they made quick work of the Falcons, 34-19. Elway threw for 336, won Super Bowl MVP, and retired, riding off into the sunset with back-to-back titles. And Terrell Davis's 2,000-yard season remains one of the greatest ever. His playoff dominance secured his Hall of Fame status, even if his prime was painfully short. And the Falcons, they got blitzed in the Super Bowl and wouldn't get back there until the infamous 28-3 collapse. But 1999 was even more cinematic. The decade ended with the underdog of all underdogs, a team no one believed in, a quarterback nobody had heard of, and an entire offense that earned its own nickname. This was the birth of the greatest show on turf, a whirlwind of motion, speed, and points orchestrated by a former grocery store stock boy turned MVP. It was the year of Kurt Warner, and it felt like a movie the whole time. But the story began with disaster. Rams quarterback Trent Green tore his ACL in the preseason, and St. Louis's season looked over before it started. But head coach Dick Vermeil handed the reins to Kurt Warner, a 28-year-old backup who played in the Arena League, Europe, and stocked shelves at Hy-Vee. So, of course, magic ensued. The Rams' offense exploded. Marshall Faulk became the clear-cut best running back in the league, going over 1,000 yards rushing and receiving, while Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, and Az-Zahir Hakim stretched the field like no team had ever done. Warner threw 41 touchdowns, won MVP, and the Rams went 13-3, eviscerating everyone. Elsewhere in the NFC, the Buccaneers, led by a ferocious defense, made a playoff run. The Vikings were still good, but less explosive than '98. Washington was weirdly competitive, and Dallas was officially running on fumes. In the AFC, Cleveland got a fresh iteration of the Browns, and the Titans, formerly the Oilers, finished 13-3 and looked built for playoff football. Steve McNair was tough as nails. Eddie George was a sledgehammer, and their defense was opportunistic. The playoffs gave us one of the most iconic moments in NFL history, the Music City Miracle, where the Titans beat the Bills on a last-second lateral and run touchdown that stunned the world, adding one more merciless bad luck blow to the Bills' decade. The Titans rolled through the Colts and Jaguars to face off against the Rams in their very first Super Bowl, and the Rams stormed ahead early, but the Titans clawed back. With 6 seconds left, down 23-16, Steve McNair had Tennessee at the 10-yard line with one last play. Kevin Dyson caught a slant, reached for the end zone, but was stopped 1 yard short. The Rams won the Super Bowl, Kurt Warner won MVP, and the decade ended with the most dramatic punctuation imaginable. Kurt Warner's rise became instant legend, from undrafted backup to Super Bowl MVP virtually overnight. His story and that Rams offense helped redefine what the modern NFL could be. And as the 2000s dawned, the power was shifting. The Rams were at the peak of their powers, Peyton Manning was emerging, and a 6th-round pick named Tom Brady was about to be drafted. So click here to relive the nostalgia of the 2000s.